All right. Your Worship, we're live.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Clerk, and good morning, everybody, and welcome. We'll start the day off with this first meeting for the day, and item number 1 on the agenda is the land acknowledgement, and I'll look to Councillor DeLeo. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. The town of Wasaga Beach acknowledges it is located upon the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people of the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge that the people of the Wyandot Nation also inhabited these lands. We acknowledge that these nations were sovereign nations existing before the arrival of settlers. We respect the spiritual interconnection among these nations to the land and to the water. We also acknowledge that waterways near us have a long history predating European arrival. Since time immemorial, waterways were the lifeblood of the indigenous people by trade and hunting routes. We are dedicated to inclusivity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in our future stewardship of the land and the longest freshwater beach in the world. In the spirit of reconciliation, we welcome the opportunity of learning to be sustainable caretakers of the land and waterways for all future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meg Wish, Councillor. And moving on to item number 2 on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interests. I have none before me at this time. If at some point throughout the meeting you feel you have a pecuniary interest, please let us know at that time. Item number 3 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, and a recommendation is that the contents of the special council meeting agenda for September 14th, 2024 be approved as circulated. Could I have a mover and a seconder for this, please? Deputy Mayor Snell and Councillor Belanger, all in favor? That carries unanimously. Moving on to item number 4 is presentations, and 4.1 is the wastewater rate presentation, and we'll look to our Deputy Treasurer, Shannon, to present this. Good morning, Shannon, and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Smith. Good morning, members of council, staff, and public viewers. This morning, I will be presenting our 2025 water and wastewater rate update. The purpose of the water and wastewater rate study is to review the activity levels and the financial needs of the water and wastewater system and determine if any changes to the current rates are necessary for financial sustainability. The town of Wasaga Beach has certain obligations under the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And these obligations include preparing and approving a plan that reviews the full cost of providing the water and wastewater services, outlining how it intends to pay for the full cost of these services, and maintaining a dedicated reserve account for revenues allocated in the cost recovery plan to pay for the full cost of providing water and wastewater services. And this includes, but is not limited to, the operating costs, capital renewal costs, and replacement costs. The water and wastewater system is self-sustaining. This means the funds generated from the system rates are used to maintain the system and help pay for future replacement and maintenance of the assets. The review looks at how much is required for future operations and asset management to ensure the system is fully financially sustainable, and whether changes to the water and wastewater rates are required to meet these needs. It is important to know that no profit is generated for the town from the water and wastewater rates. Any funds collected in excess of the current year operating costs are held in a dedicated water and wastewater reserve fund, as mandated by the province, in order to meet the long-term financial needs of the water and wastewater system. The rate structure is considered adequate when it provides for the following: the building of reserves to meet future replacement requirements, maintenance on the existing infrastructure as needed. It covers the annual operating costs of the system and leads to a financially sustainable system. There are specific factors that are considered during the process of the review. The largest influence comes from the number of system users. Other factors include employee wages and benefits from council-approved salary grid and union contracts, the Ontario Clean Water Agency, or ACWA, contract, utility costs, asset replacement requirements, and inflation rates. During the review process, the following steps are taken. First, a detailed review is made of system users. This includes a forecast for new users in coming years. We start with the total current users, which for 2024 is 14,052. We then forecast expected new users based on predictions of new homes in the most recent development charges study. We also analyze consumption patterns. This involves calculating the average consumption levels per system user. And the average for a single-family home in 2024 is 168 cubic meters annually. There is also a review of the revenues and operational costs. Revenues come from the base and consumption charges, and we look at the operational costs for both the water and wastewater systems. Inflation rates have had a big impact on the operational costs of maintaining our systems and needs to be monitored for the effect on financial forecasts. It is important to understand the needs of the system in terms of renewal and replacement. We review the inventory of the system and consider replacements based on normal expected life of each asset. We review Aqua's asset inventory recommendations. We are currently in a period requiring large replacement and upgrade expenditures with more than $20 million in investments required in the next 10 years. The inflation fluctuations that we've experienced in the last few years have impacted these costs. The non-residential building CPI was 2.2% at the end of 2020. It went as high as 15.9% in 2022, was 6.6% last year, and is at 3.3% this year. We have to watch this trend and how it will affect our predicted long-term capital costs. Finally, within the steps of the review, using the rates calculated and the asset replacement requirements, we forecast the reserves required to meet the system needs. For 2025, our proposed rate increases are 5% for the water base and consumption rates, and 13.3% for the wastewater base and consumption rates. The rate increases are proposed to take effect January 1st, 2025. The proposed increases will provide for system maintenance costs and will compensate for expected increasing costs over the next 10-year period. Our community is experiencing a lot of new development, resulting in larger infrastructure to operate and maintain. They will assist with the building of reserves for future renewal and replacement needs. Our existing infrastructure is aging and will require significant investment in the next 10 years and beyond. This increase is needed if we're going to be able to meet these needs. And these will help us to meet our legislative responsibility to operate a financially sustainable system. This chart provides a comparison between the town's proposed 2025 rates and our comparator's current 2024 rates. With the proposed increase, the average user will pay $679 annually. For that full year of usage, Collingwood users will pay $337 more, Midland users will pay $349 more, Penetanguishene users will pay $496 more, and Clearview users will pay $529 more. Our proposed rates, even with the increases, are substantially below the rates of our comparators. Looking at the impact of the proposed increase on the average Wasaga Beach system user, this chart compares the average annual charges of 2024 to the 2025 proposed rates. It is split between the annual base rate and the annual consumption rate. The 2025 annual base charge moves to $455.28, an increase of $39.84. The consumption charge for 2025 moves to $226.85, an increase of $20.20 for the annual average usage. The total change in the two charges is $60.04 annually, or $5 a month. We understand that for some of our residents who may be on fixed incomes and have faced other additional increases in living costs, $5 a month can be significant. But when taking into account the other factors for our system, it's needed. We also know that having the cost of our water sewer services significantly lower than our comparators does not change the fact that we are increasing our rates by 5% and 13.3% respectively. We don't make these decisions or recommendations lightly. We still have a legislative responsibility to ensure that we are setting fees at a level that will provide for safe and sustainable water system for our residents. This graph shows the forecasted balances for the water and wastewater reserves respectively over the next 10 years. There's some very important information in this graph. You will see that as we complete needed capital projects for the wastewater system, including sewer upgrades, we will be drawing on the related reserve to fund them. In 2025, this reserve drops to under $500,000. As the projects are completed, there is a slow climb to replenish the balances. This replenishment is key as we look forward to the large water main and sewer replacement renewal costs predicted to start around 2059, based on the estimated useful life of the assets, and is part of maintaining a sustainable system. The predicted combined balance of $39 million in 2034 seems like a big number, but 35 or 40 years from today, we will need more than 4 times that amount, as a large portion of our infrastructure reaches the end of its expected useful life. Our asset management plan indicated that in order to be ready for these future replacements, we should be contributing $4 million a year to these reserves. In 2023, we contributed a combined $2.3 million, and we are forecasting $2.6 million for 2024. The recommended rate increases will help to address this gap and to slowly increase that contribution. These last 3 slides show the proposed residential rates, non-residential rates, and lifestyle condominium and flat rate construction charges. Starting with this slide are the residential rates. The monthly base charge for single-family residents is $16.32 for water and $21.62 for wastewater. And the consumption rates per cubic meter are 48 cents for water and 85 cents for wastewater. For the non-residential rates for the 3/4-inch size service, the monthly base charges are $16.32 for water and $21.62 for wastewater, and the consumption rates per cubic meter are 48 cents for water and 85 cents for wastewater. These rates are the same as the residential rates at this size service, but they increase as the service size increases. And the final slide in this presentation shows the lifestyle condominium rates and the flat rate construction rates. The lifestyle condominium monthly base rate is $12.25 for water and $16.22 for wastewater, and the consumption rates are the same as the residential rates at 48 cents and 85 cents per cubic meter. The flat rate construction rate monthly water base rate is $20.90, and the wastewater rate is $27.95, and there's no consumption rate for this class. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we are required under the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act to ensure that we are operating our water and wastewater systems in a financially responsible and sustainable manner. We have an obligation to our system users to make sure that we meet those requirements. In conducting this review and making our recommendations, we do not take this responsibility lightly, but do our best to make sure that we can provide the municipal water and wastewater services that will continue to meet the needs of our community in a financially sustainable way. This concludes the water and wastewater presentation on proposed rate changes.
Thank you very much, Shannon. I'll just note that notice of this public meeting for the water, wastewater rates and fees and charges was published in the Beach Booster and was posted on the town's website. The purpose of this public meeting and presentation is to explain to the public the factors that are considered when establishing the water and wastewater rates and outline the proposed new rates for 2025. Again, thanks for your presentation, Shannon. I'll now look to our Deputy Clerk. Do we have any visitors online that have inquiries or questions or comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. There are no one online, and there's no one in the public.
All right, seeing no one in the public or online, we'll then move to council for questions or comments on this. Members of council, Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one question. How were we able to charge so much less than our neighboring municipalities for so long? Is it cost-based, or was that a budget strategy? Thank you.
Shannon?
Through your worship, I think that this was partly budgeting and cost strategy in prior years. The assets in these systems do last a long time, and the expected life predictions were long, and sometimes we don't always start building those reserves right away.
All right, thank you. Councillor White?
Thank you, Your Worship. And building on that comment, we'd be foolish not to ask the question. Collingwood's had a significant challenge with their wastewater management and their capacity, and they're significantly more expensive than we are. Are we going to end up like they are in 10, 20 years, or are we ahead of it enough that we're not going to have capacity issues where we don't have the funds to build out like they do?
I believe that with the increases that we're recommending, and this prediction, the chart that I show with the predicted reserve balances does assume a larger increase each year over the next 10 years, we should be okay. And one of the great things that we will have in the next year that we'll be analyzing is we have our new asset management system, which will provide more detailed, information and more analytics that we can use to predict when and how much some of these costs for replacement will be, and we'll be able to make sure that we're on top of that ahead of time.
All right, thank you, Councillor White. Councillor DeLeo?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a little on the other side on this agenda, as we all know, each year. So I'm a little confused as to where the increased funds are used. If one takes into consideration the amount of residential, commercial, and farm increases through the years, claiming reserves needs to be replenished. And you compare it to the total yearly expenses, it seems that every year we obtain more funds than expenses and or are used for contracts and expenses. So for 2023, water rates and wastewater rates were increased by 3.5%. For 2024, water rates were increased by 4% and wastewater rates by 8%. For 2025, rates will be increased 5% and wastewater rates by 13.3%. Therefore, making it an increase for 3 years of 12.5% water base and 24.8% for wastewater base. I do not find these increases reasonable. I personally don't. Most people are struggling to make ends meet, and future increases will only hurt struggling residences. To date, between all increase in the different areas and taking into consideration our senior population on fixed income, I find we no longer are realistic on what is affordable in terms of increases compared to the fixed income residents of Wasaga Beach. The increase for water is merely projecting on future infrastructure plans. I believe residents have been burdened with many increases in general from food, shelter, and everyday living expenses. So you mentioned something in your speech that the water rates are self-sustained, correct? But yet, you sent me this report here when I asked for it. You said here that in the reserves, so basically the reserves is for future, correct? Am I correct? Okay, so wait, let me finish. So we contributed 1.4 million in 2023, and we'll continue to put in approximately 1.1 million for 2023. That's what you wrote. So in 2023, 2.5 was put into the reserves, yet we took out 2.4 million out of the reserves in 2023. So it's like you're putting it in, but yet you're taking it out. But I thought reserves was for the future planning. So that's where I'm getting confused. If we've got to build these reserves, why are we taking money out of these reserves? I mean, I may be new to this, but it's just, I'm not figuring that one out. So if you could explain it, I would appreciate it.
I'll let Shannon take a go at this, but before you do, Shannon, Kevin, can you tell us what it costs per linear foot or meter, just a ballpark, to replace water and wastewater lines?
So, through you, Your Worship, I guess, kind of a loaded question. Certainly, there's a lot of variables that you need to take into account when projecting or predicting or estimating cost per meter. Depends on the size of the pipe, the depth of the excavation, groundwater, dewatering, what the restoration costs are and utility conflicts. So it can be anywhere from $300 to $500 to $1,200 a meter just for the pipe. But then you have to factor in the restoration and the rest, like the curbs, the sidewalk, and everything else that comes along with it. So it's quite costly. And if I can just go back, the reason why our rates are certainly lower than others as well is simply to the fact that our infrastructure is relatively new. Like, we only started putting in sewer and water in the 80s. And when you compare with our neighboring communities, that, you know, that infrastructure in some cases has probably been in there for 70, 80, 90 years. So when the Sustainable Sewer Systems Act came into place, that is when we started to have this shift around sustainability and rates and fees to offset that cost. We've got a longer period of time to get to that point. A lot of our neighbors don't have that clock in terms of when they're at end of life, and so they needed to invest a lot more, and their rates are a lot higher. So part of the reason why our rates are lower is we have a little bit more time, but it's very costly, and when you get into what we've spent recently, if it isn't $1,000 a meter, well, you know, once you get into urbanizing roads and getting into some of the restoration costs, it's quite costly.
Thanks, Kevin. Shannon?
Through Your Worship, so speaking to the reserves and what their purpose is and how they're working, we do talk a lot about future costs because there are a lot of future infrastructure costs. All of our capital costs for these assets are covered by these reserves. In new areas, they could be covered by development charges. But in general, we are supposed to be self-sustaining in this system. So you will see money going in and out every year. Basically, we should be putting in enough to cover the infrastructure costs that are going to be happening in the next few years, this year, as well as into the future. So it's kind of you will always see money going in and out. Given that we do have more costs in the future coming, we should be putting in more than what we're taking out each year to build that up.
So I guess what it comes down to, Councillor, is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And we can look at municipalities very near to us. There's a couple who currently cannot advance any further homes because they don't have water supply, nor do they have the money to build that infrastructure. We have other municipality close to us that is, again, an issue with water supply. I think Collingwood is estimated to spend some $200+ million to expand their water facilities. Very fortunate that the province has come to the rescue there to help with that. But again, it's simply because the cost of this infrastructure is so exorbitant. If we don't plan today to make sure that we're going to be ready when we need to do that in 20, 30, 40 years from now, you know, we could look great today if we didn't increase any rates. People would love it. But I'll tell you, we wouldn't look so great in 20, 30 years from now. And just like anything else, you know, costs are rising exponentially. And, you know, I know that Clearview's cost just for their water line to bring from where they dug their wells on the 12th concession into the town of Stayner and tie into the rest of that system over the last 5-7 years, it went from somewhere around $20 million to $60+ million. And that's a big problem for a municipality, especially a municipality, all municipalities that need to grow. We need to grow because we need to be sustainable. In order to do that, we need more dollars per linear foot out of taxes in order just to maintain the services we have today, never mind increasing those. And so The other side is, as Shannon mentioned, that these reserves are in place and meant to be not put there and saved forever. They're meant to be spent as required. A good example is we had an issue with the wastewater pipe across the Schoonertown Bridge a couple years ago that we never anticipated. It was only 40 years old. Should have lasted another 30, 40 years, and we had to replace that. If we didn't have reserves, we would have been in big trouble there. So understand where you're coming from and fixed incomes and everything else, but our responsibility is to the future of this municipality, and I'm quite confident with what staff are asking. I sometimes look at these increases and think, is this enough? Where we are, to the other two councillors' points, you know, our neighboring municipalities are considerably more, not just a little bit, but considerably more than we are, and you know, in future years, do we need to look at this and say, is this enough? Because I can tell you, we do not want to run into the same issues our neighbors have run into recently, and we can't always rely and hope that the province is going to be there to bail us out. And what we've learned is that the more fiscally responsible you are as a municipality, the tougher it is to get dollars from other levels of government. So any other questions, Councillor? Yeah, go ahead.
A new build, are they not responsible to put in their own water lines for the new homes? We're just responsible for our streets, correct? But any new build, they are responsible to put those in, not at our cost, but at their cost. Am I assuming that correctly?
I'll let Kevin speak to that. Yeah.
I guess it depends on the circumstance. In a new development, greenfield development, obviously the cost of the infrastructure is part of their house. But in an infill lot, that infrastructure was already installed through some means, whether it was through a local improvement or advanced through the municipal process. But residents are then required to connect to the services at the road and bring them into their property. New houses pay for development charges, which then also go into reserve to help sustain as well in terms of long-term planning and expansion to our system. So that's part of it as well. But when they do connect to the system, operationally, it's a stress on certainly our assets and our resources. So they do contribute to that as well.
All right, good, Councillor. All right, Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, through the mayor. Just some of the points that we're going to talk to was already covered, but I don't want everybody it was mentioned it's in and out. It's not always 30 and 40 years. I've been on council 9 years, and certainly Kevin has brought a lot of reports forward as we increase the capacity and the efficiency of our wastewater pollution control plant, and you know, those have been very expensive. I do want to point out that we do take those opportunities to become more efficient and greener as we do those updates, and that's important too, because we are trying to reduce our carbon footprint. Again, you know, it's sort of pay me now and pay me later. People don't like a price increase, but if all of a sudden we have a problem with the quality of our water or the handling of our wastewater, it becomes a much bigger problem. So I think we have been very forward-looking and responsible in this, and I certainly support the planning and the recommendations.
All right, thank you, Councillor. And now Deputy Mayor Snell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I can appreciate as well, Councillor DeLeo, to your point in regards to increases, and we're seeing it across the board in everything that gets touched. But when it comes to water and wastewater, we only have to look at the history of Walkerton, right? And that significant situation where the eye wasn't kept on the ball. And to GM Lalonde's point, this is massive infrastructure, and we were gifted by the foresight of previous council members, especially the former mayor, Cal Patterson, you know, and bringing in this initial infrastructure and getting us off of septic and wells. And to the mayor's point in regards to the recent bailout to our neighboring municipalities, a couple neighboring municipalities, to the tune of $70 million. So although this is an increase, and we don't like to see increases, I absolutely support this. And to your point, I also question, is this enough? You know, we might need to have to revisit that, but I appreciate staff's planning for the future and protecting our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Snell. And just a quick correction. So this wastewater sewer system started actually back with our first mayor, which was Mayor Claire Robertson, and then Mayor Borthwick also worked towards it. So it's been a consolidated effort. And, you know, the one thing we can say is that we've done a good job in the town of Wasaga Beach since its inception to ensure that we maintain the system well and that we grow it as required and repair it as required. All right, there's no further comments. I would just like to mention that a copy of the water wastewater study, today's PowerPoint presentation and report is on the town's website for viewing by the public, and that this meeting is now closed and we will consider the staff report regarding the proposed 2025 fees and charges and water wastewater rates. So this meeting is now closed.
Sorry, Your Worship, can we just pass the motion with regards to receiving the presentation for information?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Sorry, my mistake. Moving back up to the recommended motion that the 2025 water wastewater rates presentation be received for information. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Timms and Councillor White, all in favor? Opposed? That carries 6-1. Thank you. All right, we'll now move on to item number 6 on the agenda.
Through your worship, if members can just check the volume on the side of their mics to make sure that it's down. Thank you.
Good. All right. Nope, still got some, Chris. All right, thank you very much, Chris. So moving on then to staff reports, item 6.1, the 2025 fees and charges and wastewater rates update. Recommended motion that the report titled 2025 Fees and Charges and Water Wastewater Rates Update to Council meeting of November 14, 2024 be received, and that the appropriate bylaw to implement the fee increase be considered by Council on November 28, 2024 following the public consultation. Can I have a mover and a seconder on this, please? Moved by Deputy Mayor Snell and seconded by Councillor Belanger. All in favor? Opposed? That carries 6-1. Moving on to item number 7, bylaws. Recommended bylaw 2024-85 be received and to be deemed and read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. Mover and a seconder for this, please. Moved by Councillor DeLeo, seconded by Councillor White. All in favor? That carries unanimously. And item number 8 is adjournment, and so this meeting will now adjourn and we will reconvene our regular council meeting at 10 o'clock.